Welcome to my channel. I'm Elizabeth Liz Muschett, and my astrology star sister, colleague, and friend, Madam Simon, is joining me. Hi, Simon.
Hi, Liz.
It's a pleasure to have you back on my station or on my channel again.
It's always a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
And we're talking about Chiron Conjunct Eris in Aries 2025. Simon's an archetypal astrologer, tarot reader, and visionary artist. Her website is iconalchemy.com. I'm an astrologer, author, intuitive, and numerologist, certified relationship astrologer, Dwarf Planet University graduate, and my website is alightpath.com. And we're going to start with some foundational parts. We're going to start with Aries. Aries is a fire element about passion, enthusiasm, trailblazer. It's of the cardinal modality. It initiates, and it's the beginning of a new cycle. The ruling planet of Aries is Mars. The mantra is I am. And some keywords are active, energetic, adventurous, assertive, and independent. And cautions, overly aggressive, pushy, temperamental, and self-absorbed. And I'll let Simon tell us some things about Chiron.
So, Chiron was discovered on November 1st, 1977. It orbits between Saturn and Uranus with an orbit of 50.39 years. In 1977, it was classified as an asteroid and a minor planet. In 1989, it was found to exhibit behavior of a comet. So classifications for this range from Centaur, Asteroid, Comet, and minor planet. So you'll hear people using these various terms to describe it. And initially, when I first started studying Chiron, I was like, what is going on here? What is this thing? But that's why it has so many descriptors going on.
And Chiron in astrology is best known as the wounded healer. And the archetype is teacher, healer, shaman, tutor, guru, guide, and foster parent. It's associated with alternative therapies and holistic medicine. It helps us face and embrace personal wounds, transforming pain, fear, and suffering into healing, growth, and power, and sharing what we have learned to help others preserve and heal. And Simon, you can do the mythology.
Okay. So Chiron is a centaur, part horse and part man, um, a figure in Greek mythology. He's the son of the Titan Cronus and the sea nymph Philyra, and lived at the foot of Mount Pelion. Um, and unlike the other centaurs, who tended to kind of run wild and carouse and drink and all of that, Chiron rose above the beastly part of his nature and was known for his wisdom as a healer and a teacher of heroes, as well as an astrologer and oracle. He figures prominently in the myths of many of the great heroes, Heracles and Achilles being two of the more notable ones. In the city of Magnesia in northern Greece, he was credited with the invention of medicine. Apollo was his foster father, who taught him music, pharmacy, which in Greek is herbcraft and medicine combined, and archery and prophecy.
And Chiron's wound, his first wound was rejection by both parents. His mother rejected him due to his appearance, and his father rejected him because he was the product of an affair. And the second wound, which most people are very aware of, is he was wounded by a poisonous arrow dipped in the blood of Hydra. He retreated to a cave to heal himself and couldn't, and he remained in pain and couldn't die because of his immortality. He traded his immortality for freedom of Prometheus, The Titan punished for gifting fire to humans in order to be released from his immortal pain. Zeus honored Chiron's sacrifice and wisdom by allowing him to be placed among the stars for eternity as the constellation Sagittarius. And Simon, will you share about Eris?
Okay. So Eris was discovered on January 5th of 2005. She is a trans-Neptunian object, abbreviated as a TNO, with this highly tilted and elliptical orbit. So most of the planets, they orbit the sun kind of like this. Eris does like this. And her orbit is huge. It's 561.38 years. And extends all the way from around the area of Neptune out into the Kuiper Belt. So, it's a huge, huge distance, far beyond Pluto. Okay. She is the most massive and the second largest known dwarf planet in the solar system. Around the time that she was discovered, it was thought that she might be even bigger than Pluto, but it turns out she's a little smaller than Pluto, but she's more massive. She's got more oomph even than Pluto. And her discovery sparked reconsideration of what the definition of a planet was. And so that in turn got Pluto, demoted to a dwarf planet, got Ceres elevated to a dwarf planet. Ceres, who is also known as the mother of the asteroids. So Eris was already disrupting things when she was found.
Okay, and then Eris in Greek mythology. Why don't you go ahead and tell us about this one?
Yeah, so she is the Greek goddess of discord and strife. She personified the strife of war. So she roused the enemy armies to fight. She, would go out there and basically like scream at them to get up and fight. But she didn't actually take part in combat herself. So I find that kind of interesting. She sometimes is considered by astrologers to be a feminine warrior archetype, and yet she's not actually doing any fighting. She just has this kind of bloodlust to see other people fighting. And she was said to be the last on the battlefield to remain on the battlefield all the way up to the end of a conflict, delighting in the carnage. Okay. In Homer's Iliad, she is referred to as a sister of the Greek god Aries, god of war, which would make her a daughter of Zeus and Hera. But according to Hesiod, she's a daughter of Nyx, the Greek goddess of night, and was conceived through parthenogenesis, which means, being conceived without a father. So, depending upon which myth you're looking at, that's going to give her very different relationships.
Want to continue?
Yeah. So in Greek myth, all of the gods except for Eris were invited to the wedding of the hero Peleus and the Nereid Thetis. Okay. Eris arrived anyway, despite the fact that she wasn't invited, but was refused admission. And so, she kind of gets in this tiff and throws this golden apple marked for the fairest into the feast, where Hera and Athena and Aphrodite quarreled over it. And Zeus is like, oh my goodness, you guys got to resolve this. But, calls upon this mortal Paris to resolve the dispute, which I'm sorry, but that's setting Paris up. There's no way that he can win. Right? No matter which goddess he claims is the fairest, the other ones are going to be pissed off. So, in this case, Aphrodite promised him Helen of Troy in exchange for him choosing Aphrodite as the fairest. And this led to Paris's abduction of Helen, who was, as I recall, supposed to be married to Menelaus. Okay. And this resulted in the Trojan War. And so we can see then, Eris doesn't just disrupt something and have, okay, it's an unpleasant situation for a little while, but we get over it. No, there are ripple effects, okay, long lasting consequences to Arisian disruption.
So that brings us to Chiron Conjunct Eris in Aries on May 26, 2025 at 9:02 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and on the 27th Eastern Daylight Time. And we have Chiron and Eris circled in pink on the on the bottom right of the chart. And it's also conjunct Venus there too. So, and this is the aspects. Do you want me to tell all the aspects and then you start talking about
Sure.
them?
Go ahead.
Okay, and then so Chiron and Eris are trine Mars, and Mars is in Leo, and sextile Jupiter and Pallas Athena, and Jupiter is in Gemini, and Pallas Athena is in Aquarius, and then quincunx the south node in Virgo. So you can talk about any of and all of them.
Right. So first of all, this is the first of 3 of these conjunctions between Chiron and Eris between now and next February, if I remember correctly. And so, and these 2 remain in orb of this conjunction for a fair amount of this year. They're both very slow moving planets. Okay. Eris has been in Aries for all of my life, and I'm 55 years old. So, this is this kind of underlying signature for all of this year. And then, anything that goes through these this third decan of cardinal signs during this year is going to keep triggering this conjunction. Okay, so we're going to keep feeling effects of this conjunction. It's not just a one-off, which is why we decided to talk about this. So first of all, we see that Venus at the time of this of the exact conjunction of Chiron and Eris, Venus is applying to the conjunction with them, is an orb of the conjunction with them. This conjunction also happened on the same day as the recent new moon in Gemini. Okay. So it strongly flavors this particular lunation, this particular lunar cycle. Okay. With Venus, of course, that's going to affect our relationships, affect our social interactions, affect our ability to be diplomatic or not, affects what we consider to be fun. Okay, what do we take pleasure in? Can also affect our aesthetics, certainly, but in particular, given the significations of Chiron and Eris, we might expect this to have more of an impact on our social interactions, okay? And certainly an impact on mundane astrology, world astrology, okay? So, with Chiron conjoining Eris, there is this sense of the things that are hurting needing to be pointed out, but often pointed out in a disruptive fashion. This isn't, if it's just Venus and Chiron, well, then Venus might try to be diplomatic about where we're wounded. But with Eris in the mix, it's, oh no, we're having none of this diplomacy stuff. Here's the problem. And I'm going to call out about it through a megaphone. And, you know, F your feelings and all of that. Okay. That kind of attitude. And so, in particular, because chironic wounds, these are not, oh, I fell down and bumped my knee, you know, these are things that we don't know how to heal in ourselves. So things like chronic illness, we can see with Chiron. Things like ancestral trauma, or childhood trauma, PTSD, CPTSD. Okay. Those are the kinds of things that resonate with a chironic wound. As Liz mentioned before, Chiron was rejected by both parents. So in particular, the Chiron myth will resonate for people who do not have happy family histories, for people who have been rejected by their parents, for people who, have felt the sting of abandonment. Okay. And then when you bring Eris into the mix, again, Eris doesn't just call attention to this in some nice, socially acceptable way. She calls attention to it in the way that is going to stir up the most trouble. Okay. If we want to look to the past history with regard to this conjunction, Chiron conjoined Eris in Aries in 1971 and 72 during the Vietnam War. Okay. Interestingly enough, the Pentagon Papers were released to the New York Times during that year that were exposing the lies that had been told by the Johnson administration about why we got into that conflict. Okay. So that's a very, Chiron Eris combination. Prior to that, Chiron conjoined Eris in Pisces during 1917, 1918. When the United States got into World War I. World War I, of course, being this horrifying experience of warfare, of slaughter, of carnage that Eris likes, and so many people traumatized, wounded, so many lives destroyed, that chironic wound that we see there. So, that's the 20th century history of Chiron Eris conjunctions. But it's notable that neither Chiron nor Eris had been discovered at that point. And so this is the first set of Chiron Eris conjunctions that we're going through where we're fully conscious of those archetypes. Okay.
I
So
remember in
go on.
1971 and 72 that my dad was very concerned because you had to wait in line a really long time to get gasoline for your vehicle, and the prices went up, and he didn't know if he was going to have gas, so he was stressed out to go to work.
Yeah, right. For ordinary people at that time, those gas lines were a huge thing at that time. And that's also one of the things that I very much see with this particular Chiron Eris conjunction, because Aries can very much relate to self-sufficiency, our ability to be strong and independent and capable and take care of ourselves. And Chiron in Aries has been dredging up a lot of insecurities for people about, how do I manage to take care of myself with all the social disruptions, the economic disruptions that have been going on. It should also be noted that Chiron in Aries is the United States Aries placement. And so in recent years, we've been going through the US Chiron return. And so now this is coming on the heels of that. And so that, again, it really dredges up those feelings of insecurity about self-sufficiency, but now not just on the personal level. Remember, this is on the on the national level and on the world stage level. Okay. Because these planets move so slowly, and dwarf planets or whatever, these planetary bodies move so slowly that they mark generations. Okay. They affect the temperament of generations. So again, back to this chart, this is the first in the series. Venus is applying to that conjunction. So that really puts a very social lens on this. That really affects how we experience both interpersonal relationships one-on-one and then more communal relationships. What's going on in the community? How is the community feeling about our ability to be connected with each other? Okay. Now, this conjunction trines Mars, which is Aries ruler, in Leo. Okay. Another fire sign. Mars in Leo acts from the heart, acts with passion, certainly can have the best of Mars in terms of courage and the willpower to get stuff done, but can also be impulsive, okay, hasty, temperamental, even angry. You ever see a Leo angry? Boy, they are a force of nature. Okay. So there is that power, that oomph, for better or for worse in this trine. Okay. And we may, in the wake of this conjunction, especially since at this point Mars is applying to the trine with that conjunction. Okay. That we may see people kind of lose their tempers, right? Go off half cocked. And keep in mind, like, Chiron Conjunct Eris can really reflect what I've heard described as an accumulation of offenses. It's not just, oh, I've got this one wound. It's like, no, I've got this wound and all these other things have been stacked on top of it. Mm-hmm. And now I've reached the point where I can't be quiet about it any longer. And because of the wear and tear that bearing such a wound puts on you, it's a lot harder to be nice about it. Okay. When I went through my cancer battle, okay, by the time I got my diagnosis, I was in lots and lots of pain. And it was really difficult for me to be able to express things rationally because the pain had been wearing me down for so long. Okay. So I feel like that is the flavor of this conjunction. And so as a result, we need to be aware of that when people are expressing their hurts in ways where, we might be tempted to tone police or whatever, we have to recognize they've probably been enduring for quite some time. A lot of the Chironic archetype is about this enduring the unendurable for a huge amount of time. Okay. And when we finally reach our breaking point, not going to be so nice about it. Okay. So then what's interesting here is that we've got this, this sextile that is going on with Chiron and Eris with Jupiter and Pallas, and Jupiter and Pallas are actually trying each other. So we've got a minor grand trine going on there. Okay. And I know Liz and I have talked about this configuration before. But I do feel like, among other things, with Jupiter in Gemini, Jupiter's in detriment in Gemini, Jupiter is like expanding all this information that we're receiving in Gemini, good or bad, misinformation, stuff we can't really tell whether or not it's actually truthful or not. Okay. So there's been this kind of bombardment of information. We've seen the advent of big data, okay, with AI and the use of big data. And so we're getting lots of information that can be helpful in some ways to make hurts known, to help draw attention to things that need to be remedied. But at the same time, the signal to noise ratio is kind of rough. Okay. Pallas in this configuration certainly helps us to be more discerning about what we are hearing within the collective. Okay. Pallas is, Pallas Athena, goddess of wisdom, okay, is good at helping us with being strategic in our thinking and our communication. And in connection with this Chiron Eris conjunction, that would then be strategic about what and how we choose to reveal the things that are hurting, what and how we choose to disrupt. Okay. Eris is really good at pointing out hypocrisy and pointing out the ways in which the system continues to perpetuate hurts, all while, putting on this veneer of like, oh, we're really trying to help people. Okay. So Pallas in Aquarius is concerned with what's going to move humanity forward. Okay, Aquarius is concerned with group consciousness, with the evolution of humanity, with what's going to be good for people as a whole. Okay, so Pallas there is trying to be helpful, even with Eris being disruptive, right? Pallas then may be saying, how can we use this impulse to disrupt things in a judicious way rather than a strictly destructive way? Okay. However, that quincunx to the south node is it's a little troublesome. A quincunx is where, planets and points that are in a quincunx relationship to each other do not share an element or a modality. And so they have difficulty understanding each other. Okay. And the south node in Virgo, that relates to where we're coming from karmically, and thus where we may be a little too entrenched, a little too comfortable, needing to, let go of things that no longer serve us. Okay. But when we've got the quincunx with this Chiron Eris conjunction, then that suggests that there are areas where we have gotten comfortable with things being a certain way, where we, like our nice, neat little orderly world. Virgo very much likes things to be nice and neat and orderly. Okay. Right. And so, we've gotten too comfortable with that. And then here is this jarring Chiron Eris conjunction pointing out things we would rather not see. And some of us may really want to put on blinders to that. So that's what I see with that quincunx there.
Thank you. And I wanted to point out, because you said that Jupiter wasn't, it was in its fall or detriment. I think it was detriment. And
Yeah.
Venus is also not comfortable in Aries either. So it's like, we have two planets that are interacting with this that aren't in their most comfortable signs.
Yeah. Yeah. And they're both benefics, so they're both going to try to do benefic things. They're both trying to be helpful. But that can be like, Jupiter in Gemini is like, oh, I got all these things to tell you, and by the time Jupiter's finished telling you all the things, it's like you forgot what the original point was. And Venus in Aries is like, oh yes, let's, do exciting things. Let's, try new stuff and be bold and brave, but can also perhaps be more concerned with instant gratification, can maybe be a little pushy, isn't necessarily at her most diplomatic or, um, you know, comforting or easy to get along with.
So it seems to me like Eris is kind of poking at the wound, so to speak, to be, so it can be addressed and be realized. And yes, I don't believe we can totally get rid of it, but to work on it somewhat to bring about change. Would you agree?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I mean, it should be noted that, like, if you get a stab wound, okay, you can't just let that sit there and hope it heals up, right? Somebody is going to have to clean it and stitch it and all of that, and that is a painful process, right? So, so healing is not necessarily going to be a comfortable process, and pointing out where our social systems in particular, but also where our individual impulses, right, Aries, where that is continuing to wound us. That's really confrontational. People don't like to be reminded of, like, oh, maybe you're part of the problem, right? And so, this is not a fun combination, but it can be um, a useful combination if we choose to work with the energies in those way and not simply get caught up in the Aresian love of carnage.
Well, and I would suspect that quincunx to the south node is perhaps saying, well, you didn't really learn from the past, or you want to deny the past, or you want to forget the past, but you can't forget the past or deny it. It's like, we need to learn something from that past.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there.
Okay, I think we're ready to go on to our second chart.
Okay.
So the next Chiron conjunct Eris, and the dates we're giving is when it's exact, and it's not going to be that far apart, so it's still going to be within aspect. So will be at 25 degrees Aries, 15 minutes going in retrograde motion on October 8th of 2025, and our charts are all for Seattle. And so to that Chiron Eris, we have a square to Jupiter in Cancer, a quincunx now to Venus in Virgo, and a sesquiquadrate to Vesta in Sagittarius. So go ahead and start where you'd like.
Okay. Well, let's start with that square to Jupiter. Because, Jupiter in the first conjunction is, being as supportive as he can be, albeit from his detriment. But now this Jupiter is exalted in Cancer, so he's empowered, but now he's at odds with this conjunction. And you will note this is the retrograde conjunction. Okay. And so in this series of three conjunctions, we start out with Chiron and Eris are direct, and then they're retrograde. They're reconsidering the path that they have been on, the lessons they've been trying to teach us. Okay. And then they will move direct again and rejoin. Okay. And with this square from Jupiter in Cancer, Cancer is oriented toward family, okay? Family and close community, okay? Our close circle of friends, our family of the heart, as I like to put it. And, Cancer is emotionally sensitive, ruled by the moon. It relates to our instinctual reactions to things, but also our sense of, what is nurturing to us, what makes us feel emotionally secure and safe. Okay. Um, and here it's really challenging our our tendency to go it alone. Now, for America in particular, remember I said that Chiron, that we've been having the U.S. Chiron return in recent years. Okay, and there is this kind of myth of supreme self-sufficiency on the part of the United States. The whole, pull yourself up by your bootstraps thing, which is, of course, an impossible task. Okay. Um, and so I really feel like this square to Jupiter in Cancer is really going to challenge that narrative of independence. Again, both personally and collectively. Okay. And there's certainly any number of ways that can play out in world astrology and mundane astrology, whether that's, economic challenges or political challenges, what have you. But I do feel like there is going to be this challenge that says, you can't really do it all on your own. Self-sufficiency is all well and good, but we are a social species. We are interconnected, whether we like to admit it or not. And you may find that you have to be willing to ask for some help. Which is a real struggle for Chiron and Aries folks. Hi, I'm from that generation. And I suck at delegating, always have, but for that reason. Okay, oh no, I can do it all by myself. Well, humans are social. We're not meant to do it all by ourselves. And part of what distinguishes human growth, human evolution is the ability and willingness to take care of, in particular, our sick and our elderly, to take care of those with chronic illness or disabilities, to recognize the value of and connection with people who are not at tip-top strength. Okay. And so I think this is that we're going to see some challenges surrounding this. On the US national stage, that may well have something to do with disability rights, and or healthcare concerns. But on the personal level, if for any of us who have planets or personal points within that third decan of cardinal signs, we may find that we're getting challenged in terms of our attitudes about personal strength versus weakness, and how do we take care of those close to us who may need some help, and our willingness to admit our own needs for help. Okay. So there's that. We've got then the quincunx to Venus again. So now, things are flipped a bit. We saw Venus conjoining the first conjunction, applying to the conjunction with the first Chiron Eris conjunction. But now she's the one who's having difficulty understanding. Now, this is interesting because Venus in Virgo, first of all, she's said to be in her fall. She's in a place where she doesn't necessarily have all the resources she would like to do Venusian things. Now, that doesn't mean that she can't be incredibly loving or beautiful in this. Lots of Venus and Virgo types are like, they got that earthy sensuality. Okay. But Venus in Virgo shows love and affection through service, through attention to detail. I like to describe Venus in Virgo as somebody who brings you your favorite cup of tea. Okay. They remember what you like, and then they try to make sure that you've got it. Okay. Um, and that concerns me then in connection with this Chiron Eris conjunction, because it suggests that the ability to connect on that level of service toward each other, of taking care of each other, is not going to be easily present. And that actually, to my mind, fits in with that challenge from that Jupiter. Because, it wouldn't be a challenge if, like, Venus was automatically like, oh, sure, I'll help take care of you. Right? if she's having difficulty understanding, where somebody who is perhaps not able to take care of themselves in the way, we think they should be all responsible for themselves. Well, maybe they just don't have the tools that we expect them to have. Okay. And it's real easy for us to kind of get in our high horse and be judgmental, which unfortunately is one of the shadow things about Virgo, is the tendency to be kind of nitpicky and critical. Okay. To have this perfectionist attitude that says, oh, sure, everything has to be just so and perfect and right. And, I'm not going to admire or respect or understand you if you can't get those little details right. Right? Okay. But this, this isn't an unwillingness to understand. This is a kind of a fundamental difficulty. I don't get it. What's the problem? Okay. Which, when we think about the ways in which we may overlook or ignore things that are deeply hurtful to other people, a lot of times it's because we cannot conceive of it being hurtful to them. We don't know what it's like, for people who are very physically fit, for example, they cannot comprehend what it's like to be somebody who is chronically ill or disabled. Okay. And so I think that kind of lack of understanding in turn contributes to problems with empathy under this particular conjunction. Which that's what the Chiron Eris conjunction is supposed to be stirring up. Like, no, wait a minute. There's reason to be empathetic here, and we're going to get kind of pushy in pointing it out to you if you can't see it, right? Okay. And then finally, we've got that sesquiquadrate to Vesta in Sagittarius. So, the sesquiquadrate is, it's basically a square and a half. Okay. So it has that kind of abrasive feeling that a square has, but it can sometimes be maybe a little bit more subtle, not quite as obvious as the square. But nonetheless, there's that tension there. Okay. And Vesta relates to our focus, relates to what we hold to be sacred, important. Okay. Vesta is goddess of the hearth. Certainly relates to, both the hearth from the home standpoint and also the hearth from the community standpoint. And is where all of the other gods, where they were placed to be worshipped within the home environment. Okay. So she's kind of foundational when we think about it. Okay. So here she is in Sagittarius, which is ruled by Jupiter. So that's doubling down on the friction, okay, between Jupiter and the Chiron Eris conjunction. Okay. It's doubling down on that energy of friction with regard to what are our beliefs, what gives us hope, what do we put faith in, where is our optimism, also, what are we teaching, what is our philosophy of life. Okay. And again, I feel like this very much goes back to that sense that Chiron in Aries shows a wounding surrounding independence. And if our families believe, oh, well, you got to tough it out in order to show that you're responsible, when maybe you don't have the same resources that they had. We see this in like generational conflicts, right? With boomers going, oh, these kids these days, why can't they just, get a job and get a home and get their life in order and all that? And they're like, oh, excuse me, we can't afford a home like you could. Our schooling costs are so much more than they were for you. We can't get the kinds of jobs that you could. We don't have the kind of job security that you did. Okay. And so there's this kind of this fundamental discrepancy between what the belief is and what the lived experience is on the ground. Right. And so again, I see like generational conflict there. I see difficulties between people and their families. And, how do I ask somebody for help if they're looking down their nose at me because they think I'm not, I'm not exercising all of the strength that I'm supposedly capable of, when maybe I don't have it anymore. Right.
Right.
Right. So this is a tough one, this second conjunction in the series. But it's also, as I mentioned, Chiron and Eris are both retrograde. They're reconsidering, the topics of concern to them, both the wound and the calling attention to things that are not right. Since they're retrograde, retrogrades have that kind of paradoxical thing where they can sometimes act less like they normally do, but they can also call attention to their topics because they're acting less like they normally do. So we'll see. I don't know whether that'll make it stronger or, more of a hump in the background.
Thank you for all that. And then we're going to go on to Chiron Conjunct Eris number 3. Chiron and Eris will be direct. And at 24 degrees Aries in 59 minutes. So really all in that real same area of 24, 25 degrees. Yeah. So Chiron and Eris are conjunct Ceres this time. Sextile Hygeia in Gemini. Sesquiquadrate the South Node in Virgo. Yeah. So go ahead.
So that conjunction to Ceres then, very much suggests that the Chironic concerns and the Eris concerns may be tied to what nourishes us. That can literally be food, but it can also be, what is it that is nourishing to our identities and to our sense of independence, to our ability to take care of ourselves. It should be noted that this conjunction is coming, we're looking at 24, 20, 24, 25, 26, let me think. Trying to remember the exact date of the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries. It's like 20 some odd days prior to this. So this is, remember, since these are slow moving and like you said, Liz, they're in orb of this combination for so much of the time. That conjunction is coloring the big conjunction between Saturn and Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries, which is, it's a massive shift in human consciousness, in our kind of understanding of how the world works. Okay, outer planets are operating on that generational level, and they define large periods of time. And this is, that Saturn Neptune at 0 degrees of Aries is the beginning of a whole new cycle, a very long cycle. Okay. And it's being colored by this Chiron Eris conjunction. Okay. And so that suggests that for humanity to, begin the next big cycle that we're beginning, we have to pay attention to what hurts. And we have to pay attention to where we have failed to adequately address what hurts in the past. Going back to what you said about, the things we've done in the past aren't working, right? Aries is youngest sign. It's the beginning of the zodiac. And so it's all about brand new cycles. Okay. This one conjoining Ceres, and also in this sextile with Aia in Gemini. I find that one very interesting because we can very much relate her to mental health when she's in that Gemini position. Okay. And so that suggests the need to pay attention to emotional health, physical health via Ceres, and mental health all together on this personal level that in turn impacts the broader society. And that if we're not willing to acknowledge the hurts of the weakest among us, then society as a whole is negatively impacted. Okay. And so therefore, if we want a new beginning for humanity, if we want things to go better in the future for all of humanity, we got to be paying attention to who's hurting. Okay. And then with this sesquiquadrate with the South Node in Virgo, again, there's that friction with the past, that friction with where we have gotten too comfortable and too judgmental, where we have allowed the perfect to become the enemy of the good. Okay. Where we've been like, oh, you got to be like this particular way for me to take you seriously. Well, no, we all share humanity, right? And we are all imperfect. And therefore, rather than expecting somebody else to be perfect in order to be able to have their humanity acknowledged and their hurts addressed, we need to recognize that, things are messy sometimes, right? And that's part of also what this Chiron Eris conjunction is about, is that sometimes, we can't cry out for help in like, oh, would you so kindly please help me? When you're in excruciating pain, that's not happening. You're screaming. Okay. And so, I think that there's this real struggle for a lot of people who have been, systematically oppressed, people who have gone through, a lot of pain and trauma that has been ignored, or dismissed. There comes this point where it's like, I'm sorry, I can't say this in a nice way because you won't listen when I say it in a nice way. I have to say it in whatever way is going to get you to listen. And so I would argue that this means that if we want to mitigate the harsher ways that this series of conjunctions could play out, as we've seen it play out in the past, okay, with the historical examples, if we want to mitigate the more difficult aspects of this conjunction, then we need to start listening. We need to be willing to listen to people when they speak up quietly so that they don't have to scream.
That makes sense. And I would say possibly, I mean, since it's so close to the US's Chiron, that the country, it could be a wound within the United States. So of when we became a country, or even when we succeeded from England. So, I mean, there's could be all kinds of different things that could be wounding that we haven't addressed that are from the past that go way back.
Oh, absolutely. Whether that's, racism, slavery, genocide, the theft of Native American land, all of those things.
Mhm.
Those are all part of the foundation of the United States that still need to be addressed. Okay. And we can certainly sit there and gloss over and put our fingers in our ears, or do as has been being done recently with erasing African American history from websites belonging to the government, for example. We can try to erase things and like put our fingers in our ears and ignore it, but sooner or later the wound will express itself, and the more that we ignore it, the less pleasant the expression of the wound will be. And keep in mind, that doesn't have to be people like actively trying to be disruptive. It's just that the consequences of the wounding themselves can be disruptive. If somebody is struggling with CPTSD from being abused as a child, okay, their behavior, no matter how much they try to make it conform to social standards, sooner or later, the truth will out itself. Okay. It will show up in their own behavior, whether it is how they treat their own children, whatever their relationships are with, loved ones, with friends, with coworkers, whatever. Sooner or later, it shows up. And so if we don't address these things because we hope they will just go away, that ain't happening. Okay. Sooner or later, these things show up and they become disruptive. Even if the person who has the wound is trying really hard not to let it be disruptive, because they feel like, oh, that makes me not a competent person if I let it become disruptive. This series of transit says it doesn't matter how hard you try to bury it, it's going to show up.
Well, it's kind of like your example of if you were stabbed with a knife and you didn't do anything about it, it might start to heal, but then it could get infected and um, explode and be, it's like could be full of pus and all kinds of things. And so it's like you could ignore it, but then pretty soon it's like so painful and needs so much attention that it's hard to ignore then.
Right. Right.
Okay, we're going to go on to Venus conjunct Chiron, and that's on June 1st of 2025 at 25 degrees Aries in 44 minutes. It's also conjunct Eris, which we've been talking about, and sextile Jupiter in Gemini and Pallas Athena in Aquarius, trine Mars and Moon in Leo, and quincunx the South Node in Virgo.
And why we wanted to include this is, of course, because we're recording on the day of this particular conjunction, but also to give us a sense of, this is the conjunction that was applying at the time of the first of the three conjunctions in the series, and can also give a sense of, how this Chiron Eris conjunction is going to keep getting triggered throughout this year, okay, by the various transits to it. And this one just happens to be the one most immediate to our recording right now. So, there's this conjunction that's going on between Venus and Chiron and Aries here while we're talking. We've got the sextile going on with Jupiter in Gemini and Pallas Athena in Aquarius, which I already talked about. The trine with Mars is now added to by the moon in Leo. So there's this instinctive awareness of the will to act in connection with what is hurting us. Okay. And again, that quincunx to the south node in Virgo, saying what has gone on in the past has not helped. Is not addressing the problem. Okay. With Venus in the mix, going back again to the first in this series, that does say we need to pay attention to our relationships, pay attention to, how are we allowing our own desires to connect us with others, or to cause a certain amount of friction here, to reveal what are the wounds. Sometimes one of the things about Aries is Aries can be really enthusiastic. Okay. I have moon in Aries. It's my sect light. And so I can embody a lot of Aries traits that way. And so there's this rush in where angels fear to tread. And it's all a great, big, grand, exciting adventure. Oh, wait, there's a hurt here that I didn't see, that I have now stumbled into and maybe exacerbated. And so I feel like this Venus conjunction here really does give us some food for thought for addressing this series of conjunctions and all the various transits that are going to trigger this conjunction over the course of this year. That we need to, obviously we can't anticipate everything. Obviously, there's going to be times through no fault of our own, we're going to stumble into a situation and go, oh my goodness, there's a hurt here that I had no idea was here. And at the same time, we need to be willing to recognize that part of being the bold, brave version of Venus, that is Venus in Aries, is being willing to see what hurts. It takes courage to look at deep and difficult and ugly wounds. Okay. They're not things we want to look at. They're not things that make us feel comfortable. This is not a comfortable process. And so it's going to take all of our social courage, our relationship courage, our Venusian courage, Venus in Aries, to be willing to stop and sit with the wound and the wounded people. To be able to look at our own wounds, to be able to be vulnerable about them, to recognize that when somebody is sharing the story of their own wound, they're not just like telling a pretty story. They're talking about something that's deep and painful and difficult. And we may not be able to immediately help them. We may not have any gift to offer them in help except the willingness to sit and listen. Okay. And that's a tough process. Okay.
Absolutely.
It requires all of our courage, all of our willingness to face difficult things. But I do think it's worthwhile. Okay. We're not going to achieve healing if we're not willing to look at those painful, difficult things. Imagine if you're studying to be a doctor and you don't want to look at wounds. Right? Okay. You got to be willing to look at some icky things. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I very much feel like this Venus conjunction with this combination is that first call to action for us to say, be willing to be courageous and look at your own wounds and then listen and hear what others have to say about their own. Be willing to be vulnerable with each other, because that is the most courageous thing we can do right now.
Well, I like that. And I would add to be aware of what relationships possibly could be triggering your wound, and what relationships are soothing or healing, or that they listen, like you said, listen, and that are helpful in your process.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Simon, for joining me today. This has been fantastic. And I know it took us a while to get it together because we've been trying for a few days, but life
Yes.
happened. So, and I want to thank our audience that's watched live and our audience that come back and watches at a later time. We appreciate your support. Please leave us a like, subscribe. And I'm going to let Simon tell you about her Patreon page.
So I write about the astrological transits on a regular basis on Patreon. I also share all kinds of imagery there. I like to make art on a regular basis. Some of it is photography, some of it is digital art, some of it is traditional art, and I do custom astrological art for my patrons there as well. So it's a whole combination of things. If you're interested, please visit me there. And like Liz, I am a consulting astrologer. So if you're interested in a consultation, please visit me at my website, iconalchemy.com.
Thank you. And like Simon said, we both do consultations. I have a newsletter and a YouTube channel, and Simon also has a YouTube channel, so you can like and subscribe. And I do a variety of other shows with Astrology Star Sisters and other guests, so there's lots to choose from. Come back and watch some more. I will be on Talk Cosmos on June 15th, talking about the Cancer new moon. So you can watch it here on my channel. And I want to say thanks and good night, and we'll see you all next time.